The lone gunshot echoed through the valley as Nathan Frost pulled the trigger, ending the life of the rabid coyote that had been threatening his livestock. April 1879 had arrived with both promise and pain for the widower, who stood now with slumped shoulders on the outskirts of his modest ranch near Silver Reef, Utah Territory. His weathered hands, calloused from years of hard labor, trembled slightly as he holstered his revolver and turned back toward the small cabin he called home. Inside, 5-year-old Samuel and 3-year-old Elizabeth awaited his return, having grown accustomed to the sound of their father's gun. These children had known little but hardship since their mother had succumbed to typhoid fever 18 months prior. Nathan removed his hat as he stepped through the doorway, his tall frame ducking beneath the low entrance. "Papa, did you get the bad animal?" Samuel asked, clutching his wooden horse toy to his chest. Nathan nodded, tousling his son's sandy blonde hair. "I did, son. The livestock are safe now." His eyes drifted to Elizabeth, who sat quietly on the floor, her dark curls just like her mother's cascading over her shoulders as she arranged small cloth dolls in a circle. Nathan's heart ached with the familiar pain of loss and responsibility. "We need to get ready for church," he announced, forcing a smile for his children. Sundays were sacred, not for any deep religious conviction Nathan held, but because his late wife, Catherine, had believed in raising their children in the faith. Now, attending services at the small white chapel in Silver Reef had become both his tribute to her memory and his tenuous connection to the community he'd otherwise withdrawn from. As the three Frosts made their way down the dusty road toward town in their wagon, Nathan remained silent, his mind preoccupied with the endless tasks awaiting him. The children chattered, their innocent observations about wildflowers and passing birds a stark contrast to the heaviness weighing on their father's shoulders. Silver Reef had sprung up amid the red sandstone cliffs following the discovery of silver in the late 1860s. Now, a decade later, the town bustled with miners, merchants, and settlers seeking fortune or simply a new beginning. Nathan had arrived with Catherine 6 years ago, full of hope for their future. Now he merely existed, moving through each day with mechanical precision, his only true purpose ensuring his children's well-being. The small white chapel stood at the edge of town, its modest steeple reaching toward the brilliant blue Utah sky. Nathan helped his children down from the wagon, straightening Samuel's collar and brushing dust from Elizabeth's Sunday dress, tasks that Catherine had once performed with loving care. "Remember to be quiet and respectful," he reminded them in a hushed tone as they approached the church steps. Several townsfolk nodded in greeting, but Nathan merely touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, avoiding prolonged conversation. Inside, he guided his children to their usual spot, a pew near the back where they could slip out quickly if Elizabeth grew restless. Samuel sat on one side of his father while Elizabeth climbed onto Nathan's lap, her small hand patting his cheek in a gesture of comfort that nearly broke his composure. The congregation filled in around them, the murmur of voices and occasional laughter highlighting Nathan's isolation. He had Hymnal in hand but rarely sang, instead mouthing the words while his mind wandered to fence repairs and cattle concerns. As Reverend Parker took his place at the pulpit and the first hymn was announced, Nathan realized he'd forgotten to collect the children's hymn book. Samuel could follow along with him, but Elizabeth, though too young to read, enjoyed pointing at the words. Nathan glanced around, wondering if he should disturb those already seated to retrieve another book. That was when he noticed her. A woman stood at the end of their pew, hesitating. She was unfamiliar to Nathan, likely new to Silver Reef, with auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet and eyes the color of the sage that dotted the Utah landscape. "Pardon me," she spoke softly, her voice carrying a slight accent Nathan couldn't place. "Might I join you? The church seems quite full today." Before Nathan could respond, Samuel scooted closer to his father, creating space. "You can sit here, madam," the boy offered with a politeness that would have made his mother proud. "Thank you kindly," the woman replied with a warm smile, settling gracefully beside them. She held a hymnal in her gloved hands and, noticing Nathan's children sharing his book, shifted closer. "Perhaps we could share." "For the little ones," she suggested, opening her hymnal and angling it so both Samuel and Elizabeth could see. Nathan found his voice at last. "That's very kind of you, miss." "Mrs.," she corrected gently. "Mrs. Violet Whitaker, though it's just Miss again, I suppose." A flicker of sadness crossed her features before her smile returned. "And you are Nathan Frost. These are my children, Samuel and Elizabeth." His response was stiff, unaccustomed to such interaction after months of self-imposed isolation. The organ began to play, cutting short any further introduction. To Nathan's surprise, Elizabeth reached out toward Violet, her small fingers pointing at the hymnal. Without hesitation, Violet shifted it so the child could see better, then began to sing in a clear, melodic voice that caused several heads to turn in appreciation. Nathan found himself watching her more than following the hymn, noting the graceful way she held herself and the genuine kindness she showed his children. When the congregation sat for the sermon, Violet discreetly produced 2 peppermint sticks from her handbag, raising a questioning eyebrow at Nathan for permission. He nodded, slightly bemused by this unexpected development in their usual Sunday routine. As Reverend Parker spoke of community and supporting one another through life's trials, Nathan found himself acutely aware of the stranger beside him, the subtle floral scent of her perfume, the way she listened attentively to the sermon, the gentle smile she offered Elizabeth when the child whispered something in her ear. When the service concluded, Nathan expected Violet to move on quickly, her charitable act of sharing a hymnal complete. Instead, she lingered, helping Elizabeth down from the pew. "Your children are lovely, Mr. Frost," she commented, straightening Elizabeth's dress with a practiced hand. "How old are they?" 5 and 3, Nathan replied, surprising himself with the addition. "Samuel has his mother's spirit and Elizabeth her looks." Violet's expression softened with understanding. "I see, it must be challenging raising them on your own." Nathan merely nodded, uncomfortable with the personal turn of conversation. "We manage well enough. Thank you for sharing your hymnal, Mrs. Whitaker." "Miss," she reminded him with a slight smile, "and it was my pleasure." Samuel tugged at his father's jacket. "Papa, can we go to the mercantile?" "You promised we might look at the new toys Mr. Henderson got in." Nathan hesitated, calculating the time such a detour would take from his work at the ranch. "The mercantile has new inventory?" Violet inquired, her interest seemingly genuine. "I've only just arrived in Silver Reef last week and haven't had the chance to properly explore the establishments." "Been here a week already?" Nathan found himself asking. "Where are you staying?" "I've taken a room at Mrs. Pollard's boarding house," Violet explained. "I'm to start as the new schoolteacher tomorrow. The previous teacher, Miss Clark, departed rather suddenly to care for her ailing mother in Denver." Nathan nodded, recalling the announcement at the previous week's service, which he'd paid little attention to. "The children have mentioned a new teacher was coming." Elizabeth, who had been hiding partially behind her father's leg, peeked out. "Are you our new teacher, madam?" Violet knelt to the child's level, her skirts pooling around her. "Indeed I am, Miss Elizabeth. Will you be attending my school?" Elizabeth shook her head. "Papa says I'm too little still, but Samuel goes." Violet glanced up at Nathan, then back to Elizabeth. "Well, perhaps you can visit sometimes. I love having special guests in my classroom." Samuel, emboldened by this exchange, stepped forward. "Would you like to come to the mercantile with us, Miss Whitaker? Papa knows all about Silver Reef. He could tell you about everything." Nathan opened his mouth to discourage this impromptu invitation, but Violet spoke first. "I wouldn't want to impose on your family time," she said, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. "It's no imposition," Nathan heard himself say, surprising even himself. "If you're to be teaching here, you should know the town." And so it was that Nathan Frost, who had barely spoken 10 consecutive sentences to anyone outside his children in months, found himself escorting the new schoolteacher down Main Street, pointing out the assayer's office, the Wells Fargo station, and the various saloons that a proper lady like herself should avoid. Violet listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that revealed an intelligence Nathan hadn't expected. As they approached Henderson's mercantile, he found himself wondering about her story, what had brought a young widow to this remote mining town to teach. Inside the mercantile, Samuel eagerly led the way to the toy display while Elizabeth clung to Nathan's hand. Mr. Henderson, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted them warmly. "Frost family." "And I see you've met our new schoolmarm," he called out, wiping his hands on his apron as he approached. "Mrs. Whitaker, settling in well, miss," both Nathan and Violet corrected simultaneously, causing them to exchange a brief, awkward glance. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Henderson," Violet continued smoothly. "Everyone has been most welcoming." While the children examined wooden toys with longing eyes, Nathan found himself in the unfamiliar position of making small talk with Violet. He learned she had come from Philadelphia, had taught for 3 years there, and had decided to venture west following her husband's death from pneumonia 2 years prior. "I needed a fresh start," she explained, watching Samuel demonstrate a toy soldier to Elizabeth. "Somewhere my achievements and failures would be my own, not measured against my family's expectations or my late husband's memory." Nathan nodded, understanding this sentiment more than he cared to admit. Silver Reef offers that, if nothing else, a chance to be judged on your own merits. "And what brought you here, Mr. Frost?" Violet asked, her green eyes meeting his directly. Nathan hesitated, unaccustomed to discussing personal matters. "Silver in the sandstone brought most folks. For me, it was the opportunity to start a cattle ranch. Land was cheaper here than in Colorado." "And Mrs. Frost?" Violet inquired gently. Nathan's jaw tightened slightly. "Catherine took ill last winter, typhoid." Violet's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry, truly." Before Nathan could respond, Elizabeth appeared at his side, holding a small cloth doll with yarn hair. "Papa, look," she whispered, her eyes wide with longing. Nathan knelt down, examining the doll. He rarely indulged the children with toys, mindful of their tight budget, but Elizabeth had so few treasures of her own. "Is this what you'd like, Lizzie?" The little girl nodded solemnly, hugging the doll to her chest. "And what about you, Samuel?" Nathan asked, turning to his son. Samuel reluctantly set down an elaborate tin train. "Nothing today, Papa. I know we need to save money for the new fence." Nathan felt a pang of guilt at his son's words. At 5 years old, Samuel already understood sacrifice too well. "Perhaps just this once," Nathan found himself saying, reaching for the train. "You've been helping with extra chores without complaint." Samuel's face lit up with surprise and joy. "Really, Papa?" Nathan nodded, calculating mentally how many extra hours of work these purchases would require. As they approached the counter to pay, Violet discreetly examined a bolt of calico fabric. Nathan noticed her fingers tracing the pattern thoughtfully. "For a new dress?" he asked, surprising himself with the personal question. Violet smiled. "For the classroom, actually. I thought to make curtains to brighten the schoolhouse. Mrs. Pollard mentioned it's rather austere." Nathan nodded. "Catherine always said the same." He hesitated, then added awkwardly, "She volunteered there sometimes before the children came." Mr. Henderson wrapped their purchases carefully in brown paper as Nathan counted out coins from his worn leather wallet. Nathan couldn't help noticing Violet selecting only a modest amount of fabric, along with pencils and a tablet of paper. "School supplies?" he inquired as they exited the store together, the children clutching their new treasures. Violet nodded. "The school board provides some materials, but I find most teachers supplement quite a bit from their own salaries." They paused at the corner where the road split one direction leading back toward the boarding house, the other toward the livery where Nathan had left their wagon. "Thank you for the tour, Mr. Frost," Violet said, a genuine smile lighting her features. "And for the company. It's been some time since I've enjoyed such pleasant Sunday conversation." Nathan shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, unaccustomed to such directness from a woman. "It was no trouble." "The children enjoyed your company." "Only the children?" Violet asked with a hint of mischief in her voice. Before Nathan could formulate a response, Samuel spoke up. "Will you sit with us at church again next Sunday, Miss Whitaker?" Violet glanced at Nathan, clearly wanting his approval before answering. "That would be up to your father, Samuel." Nathan cleared his throat. "You'd be welcome to join us if you've no other arrangements." Her smile widened. "Then I shall look forward to it." She turned to Samuel, adopting a more professional tone. "And I shall see you tomorrow at school, young man. I expect my students to arrive promptly at 8 o'clock. Samuel nodded solemnly. "Yes, madam." With a final nod to Nathan and a gentle touch to Elizabeth's cheek, Violet departed, her skirts swishing elegantly as she made her way toward the boarding house. As Nathan helped his children into the wagon, his mind remained on the new schoolteacher. Something about her directness and warmth had penetrated the careful walls he'd built around himself since Catherine's death. It was unsettling, yet not entirely unwelcome. "I like her, Papa," Elizabeth declared as they set off toward home. "She smells like flowers," Samuel added matter-of-factly. "Not like old Mrs. Jenkins, who smells like medicine." Despite himself, Nathan smiled at his son's observation. "That's not a kind thing to say about Mrs. Jenkins, Samuel, but it's true," the boy insisted. As they traveled the dusty road back to their ranch, Nathan found himself mentally reviewing his encounter with Violet Whitaker. She was undoubtedly educated, likely from a respectable Eastern family given her refined manner of speech. What had truly driven her to leave Philadelphia for the rugged Utah Territory? The desire for independence she'd mentioned seemed genuine, but Nathan suspected there was more to her story. The ranch came into view, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, set against the dramatic red cliffs that characterized the region. It wasn't much compared to some of the larger operations, but Nathan had built it with his own hands, expanding slowly as finances permitted. Now, without Catherine's steadying presence, he sometimes wondered if he'd be able to maintain it alone, much less continue their dream of creating a profitable cattle business. After settling the children with their new toys and preparing a simple supper of beans and biscuits left from breakfast, Nathan stepped outside to complete the evening chores. As he fed the livestock and checked fences, his thoughts continually returned to Violet and their unexpected connection. Catherine had been gone 18 months, long enough that the raw wound of her loss had scarred over, though it still ached daily. The thought of finding interest in another woman brought a complex tangle of emotions: guilt, confusion, and something like hope that Nathan wasn't ready to acknowledge. Later that night, after the children were tucked into bed, Nathan sat at the crude wooden table that served as both dining area and desk, reviewing his accounts by lamplight. The numbers refused to cooperate, his mind wandering repeatedly to green eyes and a shared hymnal. "What am I doing?" he muttered to himself, rubbing a hand over his face. "She's just being neighborly." Yet even as he said it, Nathan knew there had been something more, a spark of connection, a mutual recognition that had nothing to do with neighborliness. Violet Whitaker had seen him, truly seen him, not just as the widower with 2 small children that most of Silver Reef's residents pitied, but as a man still very much alive despite his losses. Nathan closed his ledger with a decisive snap. Tomorrow would bring a new week of work and responsibility. There was no time for entertaining foolish notions about a woman he'd just met, no matter how intriguing she might be. As he prepared for bed, Nathan caught sight of Catherine's photograph on the dresser, her gentle smile frozen in time. "I'm doing my best with them, Cat," he whispered, a nightly ritual that brought both comfort and pain. "I hope it's enough." Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams a confusing blend of the past and possibilities he dared not consciously consider. Monday morning brought the familiar rush of getting Samuel ready for school. The boy was unusually eager, his excitement about meeting his new teacher evident in every movement. "Do you think Miss Whitaker will like my arithmetic, Papa?" he asked as Nathan helped him button his shirt. "Mrs. Jenkins said I was the best counter in class." "I'm sure she'll be impressed," Nathan assured him, combing the boy's unruly hair into some semblance of order. "Remember your manners and listen carefully to her instructions." Elizabeth watched the preparations with longing. "I want to go to school too, Papa." Nathan knelt before his daughter, straightening the small apron over her dress. "Next year, Lizzie girl, you're not quite old enough yet." Seeing her disappointment, he added, "But perhaps Miss Whitaker meant what she said about visiting. We can ask her on Sunday." This placated Elizabeth somewhat, though she still pouted as they loaded into the wagon for the trip to town. Nathan had arranged with the blacksmith's wife, Mrs. Reeves, to watch Elizabeth during the day while he worked. It wasn't an ideal arrangement. Catherine had always cared for the children herself, but it was the best solution he'd found since her passing. As they approached the small schoolhouse at the edge of town, Nathan could see Violet standing at the door, greeting each child with a warm smile and a few personal words. She wore a practical blue dress with a white collar, her auburn hair neatly arranged beneath a simple cap. She looked every inch the proper schoolteacher, yet there was nothing stern or forbidding about her presence. When Samuel spotted her, he waved enthusiastically. "Miss Whitaker, I brought my slate and pencil just like Mrs. Jenkins said we should." Violet's face brightened at the sight of them. "Good morning, Samuel. I'm so pleased to see you prepared for learning." Her gaze shifted to Nathan and Elizabeth, her smile softening. "Mr. Frost, Miss Elizabeth, what a lovely surprise." Nathan touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Just delivering the boy to school, Miss Whitaker. Wanted to ensure he found his way safely on your first day." "A responsible father," Violet observed approvingly. She knelt to Elizabeth's level. "And how are you this morning, Miss Elizabeth? I see you've brought your new doll." Elizabeth, suddenly shy, nodded and held up the cloth doll. "Her name is Daisy." "A beautiful name for a beautiful doll," Violet declared solemnly. "Perhaps someday soon you might bring Daisy to visit our classroom. I'm planning to start a special story time on Friday afternoons. We could set up a chair just for her." Elizabeth's eyes widened with delight. "Could I come too, Papa?" Nathan, caught off guard by the invitation and his daughter's excitement, hesitated. "I wouldn't want to disrupt your teaching, Miss Whitaker." "Not at all," Violet assured him. "In fact, I believe it would benefit the younger students to practice their reading skills by sharing stories with listeners like Elizabeth." She straightened, meeting Nathan's gaze directly. "Of course, it would depend on your schedule, Mr. Frost." Nathan recognized the considerate way she'd phrased the invitation, giving him an easy way to decline if he wished. "I'll see what can be arranged," he said finally. "Mrs. Reeves watches Elizabeth while I work, but perhaps she could bring her by for a short visit." "Wonderful," Violet replied, her smile warming him unexpectedly. The school bell rang, interrupting their conversation. "Duty calls. Samuel, shall we find your desk?" Samuel hugged his father and sister quickly before racing inside, eager to begin this new adventure. Nathan watched him go with a mixture of pride and that persistent ache that Catherine wasn't here to witness these moments. "He'll be well cared for, Mr. Frost," Violet said softly, seeming to read his thoughts. Nathan nodded, finding it difficult to meet her perceptive gaze. "I'm sure he will." "Good day, Miss Whitaker." "Until Sunday, then," she replied, a statement rather than a question. As Nathan drove the wagon toward Mrs. Reeves' house, Elizabeth chattered excitedly about the possibility of visiting the schoolhouse with Daisy. Nathan listened with half an ear, his thoughts divided between the day's work ahead and the unexpected complications introduced by Violet Whitaker's arrival in Silver Reef. By the time Sunday arrived, Nathan had convinced himself that his unusual reaction to the new schoolteacher had been nothing more than surprise at engaging in adult conversation after so long in self-imposed isolation. Samuel's daily reports about Miss Whitaker's wonderful lessons had kept her in Nathan's thoughts throughout the week, but he'd attributed this to natural curiosity about his son's education. Yet as they entered the church and Nathan spotted Violet already seated in what had become their pew, he couldn't deny the leap of anticipation in his chest. She wore a dress the color of autumn leaves, simple yet becoming, and her smile as she caught sight of them contained genuine pleasure. "We saved you a seat," she said by way of greeting as they approached. Elizabeth immediately climbed onto the bench beside Violet, while Samuel took his usual place next to his father. Nathan noted with some amusement how quickly his children had accepted this new arrangement, as if Violet had always been part of their Sunday ritual. "Samuel tells me you've introduced some new teaching methods," Nathan said quietly as they waited for the service to begin. "He seems quite enthusiastic about the changes." Violet nodded, a spark of passion lighting her eyes. "I believe children learn best when engaged through multiple approaches, not just recitation and memorization. We've started a small science corner with specimens from the area, and I've introduced music to assist with memorization of key facts. Catherine used to sing with the children," Nathan found himself sharing. "Samuel particularly loved it when she made up songs about everyday tasks." "She sounds like a wonderful mother," Violet said gently. "Samuel speaks of her often." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "He does," Violet nodded. "When we discussed family trees on Tuesday, he described her in great detail how she could make the best apple pie in Utah Territory and never raised her voice, even when he tracked mud through the house." Nathan swallowed hard, both touched and pained that his son carried such clear memories of his mother. "And Elizabeth, has she mentioned?" "Less specific memories," Violet admitted softly, "but she told me her mama lives with the angels now and watches over your family every day." Before Nathan could respond to this revelation, the organ began to play, signaling the start of the service. As they stood for the first hymn, Violet naturally positioned her hymnal where both children could see it, their shoulders touching as they sang. Nathan found himself distracted by her clear voice and the subtle floral scent that Samuel had mentioned. Throughout Reverend Parker's sermon on perseverance through hardship, Nathan was acutely conscious of Violet's presence beside him, the way she nodded at certain points, her occasional glances toward the children to ensure they were behaving, the delicate profile of her face as she listened attentively. After the service concluded, several parents approached Violet to discuss their children's progress, while Nathan waited awkwardly at the edge of the churchyard. He considered simply collecting the children and departing, their Sunday obligation complete, but something held him back. When Violet finally extricated herself from the conversations and joined them, her cheeks were flushed from the warm spring sun and animated discussion. "I apologize for keeping you waiting," she said, smoothing her skirts. "Parents are understandably curious about their children's new teacher." "No apology necessary," Nathan assured her. He hesitated, then added, "If you've no other plans, we usually take a picnic by Silver Creek after church. The children enjoy watching for fish and collecting interesting stones." The invitation surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise Violet. "A picnic," she repeated, pleasure evident in her voice. "I haven't been on a proper picnic since leaving Philadelphia. Are you certain I wouldn't be intruding on your family time? Please come, Miss Whitaker," Samuel urged before Nathan could respond. "Papa made corn bread yesterday, and we have honey from Mr. Peterson's bees." "Well, with such temptations, how could I possibly refuse?" Violet laughed. "If you'll permit me a moment to collect my basket from Mrs. Pollard's, I could contribute some ginger cookies I baked last evening." And so it was arranged. 30 minutes later, Nathan found himself seated on a blanket spread beneath a cottonwood tree along Silver Creek, watching as Violet helped the children construct a tiny boat from twigs and leaves. Her laughter floated on the spring breeze as Samuel's creation immediately capsized, sending Elizabeth into fits of giggles. "You're very patient with them." Nathan observed as Violet returned to the blanket while the children continued their boat-building endeavors a few feet away. "Children respond to patience," she replied, smoothing her skirts as she sat. "And genuine interest in their ideas, however impractical those might sometimes be." Nathan nodded, thinking of how often he found himself rushing the children through activities, his mind preoccupied with ranch concerns. Catherine had that gift as well, making each moment seem important, no matter how trivial. "She must have been remarkable," Violet said, her tone respectful. "It's clear you loved her deeply." "I did," Nathan confirmed, surprised at how easy it felt to speak of Catherine with Violet. "We were childhood sweethearts in Colorado. Married young, came here to build something of our own." He paused, looking out over the sparkling creek. "When she fell ill, it happened so quickly. Within 2 weeks, she was gone. Sometimes it still doesn't seem real." Violet was quiet for a moment, her own gaze thoughtful. "My husband James and I had only 3 years together. Sometimes I wonder if that makes it easier or harder having fewer memories to mourn." "I don't believe there's an easy way to lose someone you love," Nathan said softly. "Only different paths through the same pain." Their eyes met in mutual understanding, a connection forged through shared experience that needed no further words. After a moment, Violet reached for the basket she'd brought. "I believe I promised ginger cookies," she said, her tone lightening. "Though I should warn you, cooking has never been my particular talent. My mother despaired of ever making me a proper housewife." Nathan accepted the offered cookie, amused by her self-deprecation. "What was your particular talent then?" he asked, genuinely curious. Violet's eyes brightened. "Books, primarily. Much to my father's dismay, I would rather read than learn to embroider or play the pianoforte. I convinced him to allow me to attend teacher's college only by pointing out that a widow might need to support herself one day." Her expression turned wry. "I didn't expect to prove that argument correct quite so soon." As they continued talking, sharing stories of their respective upbringings and the circumstances that had led them to Silver Reef, Nathan realized how long it had been since he'd engaged in such easy conversation with anyone. Violet listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and shared her own experiences without hesitation or artifice. The children eventually returned to the blanket, hungry and sun-warmed. As they all shared the simple meal Nathan had packed, supplemented by Violet's surprisingly delicious cookies, he couldn't help noticing how natural it felt, the four of them together on this peaceful Sunday afternoon. Elizabeth had positioned herself in Violet's lap without invitation, while Samuel leaned comfortably against his father's shoulder, recounting his adventures in boat construction. When it came time to depart, Nathan found himself reluctant to end the day. The children clearly felt the same, dragging their feet as they helped pack up the picnic things. "This was lovely," Violet said sincerely as Nathan helped her to her feet. "Thank you for including me." "It was our pleasure," Nathan replied, meaning it. Perhaps he stopped, uncertain how to frame what he wanted to suggest. Violet waited, her expression encouraging. "Perhaps you might join us again," he finally managed. "Next Sunday, that is, if you've no other commitments." Her smile widened. "I would like that very much, Mr. Frost." "Nathan," he corrected impulsively. "If we're to be friends, you should call me Nathan." "Nathan," she repeated, her voice warming the name, "and you must call me Violet." As they parted ways in town, Nathan driving his wagon toward home with 2 sleepy children, he found himself looking forward to the week ahead rather than dreading it, a subtle but profound shift in his outlook that he attributed entirely to the woman with auburn hair and understanding eyes who had unexpectedly shared their hymnal. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Sundays became a highlight for the Frost family, with church services followed by increasingly elaborate picnics that Violet contributed to with growing confidence in her cooking abilities. Nathan found himself anticipating these gatherings with an eagerness that both alarmed and exhilarated him. During the week, his interactions with Violet were limited to brief exchanges when dropping off or collecting Samuel from school, Yet these moments took on a significance that Nathan couldn't deny. He found himself taking extra care with his appearance on these occasions and timing his arrivals to ensure a few minutes of conversation. By mid-May, rumors had begun to circulate in Silver Reef about the widowed rancher and the new schoolteacher. Nathan first became aware of this when Mr. Henderson made a pointed comment while Nathan was purchasing supplies. "Miss Whitaker seems to have taken quite a shine to your little family, Frost," the shopkeeper observed casually. "Mrs. Henderson says the two of you make a handsome couple at church." Nathan had stammered something non-committal in response, but the comment lingered in his mind. Were they a couple? Their relationship remained entirely proper friendly conversations, shared meals in public settings, always in the children's presence. Yet Nathan couldn't deny that something was developing between them, something that went beyond mere friendship. On a particularly fine Sunday in late May, their picnic had extended into the early evening. The children had fallen asleep on the blanket, exhausted from an afternoon of exploration and play. Nathan and Violet sat side by side against the trunk of their usual cottonwood tree, speaking softly to avoid waking Samuel and Elizabeth. "I received a letter from the school board yesterday," Violet mentioned, her fingers absently weaving a crown of wildflowers. "They've offered to extend my position through the next school year. Apparently, Miss Clark has decided to remain in Denver permanently." Nathan felt a surge of relief at this news. "That's wonderful. The children would be devastated if you left." "Only the children?" Violet asked, that now familiar mischievous tone entering her voice. Nathan met her gaze directly. "No," he admitted quietly, "not only the children." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Nathan found himself studying her face, the spray of freckles across her nose that the spring sun had brought out, the small scar near her left eyebrow that she'd told him came from falling out of a tree as a child, the gentle curve of her lips that seemed to invite. He looked away abruptly, clearing his throat. "Will you accept the position?" Violet was silent for a moment. "I've been considering it carefully. Silver Reef has come to feel like home in a way Philadelphia never did, despite my living there all my life." She glanced at the sleeping children. "I've grown quite attached to my students, to certain residents of the town as well." Nathan's heart quickened at the implication. "Violet," a distant rumble of thunder interrupted him, followed by Elizabeth stirring restlessly in her sleep. Dark clouds had gathered on the horizon while they'd been talking, the threat of a spring storm approaching rapidly. "We should get back," Nathan said with reluctance, moving to gather their things. "Those storms can move quickly through the valley." Violet helped him wake the children and pack up their picnic items, the moment for personal revelations lost in the rush to beat the incoming weather. They made it back to town just as the first fat raindrops began to fall, the sky darkening ominously overhead. "You should come to the ranch," Nathan found himself saying as they prepared to part ways near Mrs. Pollard's boarding house. "This looks to be a bad one. Our cabin is sturdy and there's plenty of room." Violet glanced uncertainly at the threatening sky, then back at Nathan. "I wouldn't want to impose." A brilliant flash of lightning followed by an immediate crash of thunder made the decision for them. Elizabeth began to cry, burying her face against her father's leg. "It's settled," Nathan said firmly, helping Violet into the wagon. "We'll send word to Mrs. Pollard once the storm passes." The rain began in earnest as they left town, quickly soaking through their clothing despite the canvas cover Nathan had hastily erected over the wagon. By the time they reached the ranch, all four were thoroughly drenched and shivering in the suddenly cool air. Nathan hurried them into the cabin, immediately setting about building up the fire while Violet helped the children out of their wet clothes. The domestic scene struck him forcefully, Violet moving through his home with natural efficiency, comforting Elizabeth's lingering fears about the thunder while helping Samuel into dry trousers. It was as if she belonged there, filling a space that had remained painfully empty since Catherine's passing. I'm afraid I have nothing suitable for you to change into, Nathan apologized, suddenly conscious of Violet's sodden dress. Catherine's things. I gave most away after. He trailed off awkwardly. Perhaps a blanket for now, Violet suggested practically. I can hang my dress by the fire to dry. Nathan fetched his thickest quilt, then excused himself to change in the small back room that served as his bedroom. When he returned in dry clothing, he found Violet seated by the fire wrapped in the quilt, her dress and petticoats hanging from a chair nearby. The children, already in their night clothes, were huddled at her feet as she told them a story about a brave rabbit who wasn't afraid of thunder. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the cabin, a different kind of energy filled the air. As Nathan prepared a simple supper from their leftover picnic foods and the supplies in his pantry, he found himself repeatedly glancing at Violet, her hair coming loose from its pins as it dried, the firelight casting a warm glow on her features, the easy way she interacted with his children. After they'd eaten, Nathan put the children to bed in their small room, returning to find Violet examining the few books he kept on a crude shelf near the fireplace. Your literary collection is quite diverse, she observed with a smile. Thoreau alongside practical guides to cattle breeding. Nathan shrugged, slightly embarrassed. Catherine enjoyed Thoreau, the others are more functional than inspirational. A balance of the practical and the poetic, Violet mused, running her fingers along the spine of Walden. It suits you, does it? Nathan asked, genuinely curious about how she perceived him. Violet nodded, turning to face him fully. In the firelight, wrapped in his quilt with her hair falling around her shoulders, she looked both vulnerable and somehow more real than she ever had in her proper schoolteacher attire. You present yourself as entirely practical, focused on work and responsibility, she said thoughtfully. But there's more depth there. I see it in how you speak to your children, how you notice the beauty in ordinary things during our picnics, how you truly listen when others speak. Nathan felt exposed by her assessment, yet not uncomfortably so. And you? He asked softly. How should I read you, Violet Whitaker? She smiled, a hint of sadness touching her eyes. I've spent most of my life being what others expected: the obedient daughter, the supportive wife, the proper teacher. Coming west was my first truly independent choice. She paused, meeting his gaze directly. Being here with you and the children, it feels like my second. The implication of her words hung between them, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the continuing rumble of thunder outside. Nathan moved closer, drawn by a force he no longer wished to resist. Violet, he began, his voice rougher than he intended. These past weeks have been. I never expected to feel this way again. After Catherine, I thought that part of my life was over. And now, she prompted gently when he fell silent, searching for words. Now I find myself thinking about you throughout the day, he admitted. Looking forward to those moments when we might speak, wondering what you would think about the mundane details of my life, imagining what it might be like if, he stopped abruptly. If what, Nathan? Violet whispered, her eyes never leaving his. Instead of answering with words, Nathan closed the remaining distance between them. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he raised his hand to her cheek. When she leaned slightly into his touch, he bent down and pressed his lips to hers tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. The kiss was gentle yet profound, carrying the weight of two people who had known loss finding something unexpected and precious in each other. When they finally parted, Nathan rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as he absorbed the moment. I didn't plan this, he murmured. Violet laughed softly. Nor I. When I stepped onto that church pew and shared my hymnal, I certainly didn't anticipate standing in your home wrapped in your quilt 3 months later. Nathan smiled at the image. Life takes unexpected turns. Indeed it does, she agreed, her expression growing more serious. Nathan, I need you to know I'm not trying to replace Catherine. For you or for the children, that would be impossible and wrong. I know that, he assured her, touched by her sensitivity. Catherine will always be their mother, always hold a place in my heart. But I've come to believe there's room there for new love as well, different, but no less real. Violet's eyes glistened with unshed tears. New love, she repeated softly. Is that what this is? Nathan took her hands in his. I believe it is. At least it's what it's becoming if you're willing. I am, she whispered, though I admit it terrifies me almost as much as it exhilarates me. That seems about right, Nathan said with a small smile. The worthwhile things usually do. They spoke long into the night, the storm gradually subsiding outside as they shared hopes, fears, and dreams by the dying fire. When Violet finally dozed off, still wrapped in the quilt, Nathan covered her with an additional blanket and settled into his chair nearby, unwilling to leave her even to seek his own bed. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the windows, and the realization that their relationship had fundamentally changed. As they prepared breakfast together, moving around each other in the small kitchen space with newfound awareness, Nathan found himself imagining more such mornings, a future where Violet's presence in their home was not the exception but the rule. The children, far from being confused by Violet's overnight stay, seemed to accept it as perfectly natural. Elizabeth helped Violet brush and repin her hair, while Samuel proudly showed off his collection of interesting rocks gathered from around the property. As Nathan prepared to take Violet back to town, he pulled her aside for a moment of privacy while the children collected their things for school. Last night, he began hesitantly. I hope you don't regret, not for a moment, Violet interrupted firmly, though I imagine Mrs. Pollard will have questions about my absence during the storm, Nathan grimaced. And likely answers she's already formulated. Silver Reef thrives on gossip almost as much as Silver. Let them talk, Violet said with surprising equanimity. We've done nothing wrong. And what's developing between us is too important to be dictated by town gossips. Nathan marveled at her composure. You're quite remarkable, Violet Whitaker, she smiled, straightening his collar with familiar ease. As are you, Nathan Frost. Now, shall we face the curious citizens of Silver Reef together? The subsequent weeks brought both joy and challenges as their relationship deepened and became more public. Reverend Parker, after observing them together at church for several Sundays, requested a private meeting with Nathan to discuss his intentions toward our schoolteacher. Nathan had assured him they were entirely honorable, though perhaps progressing more quickly than conventional wisdom might dictate. Life in the territories doesn't always follow Eastern timelines, Reverend, Nathan had pointed out. We learn to recognize value when we find it and to act accordingly. The Reverend, after some consideration, had nodded his acceptance. Mrs. Parker has mentioned that Miss Whitaker seems to have brought light back into your home. That's not something to dismiss lightly. By mid-June, Violet had become a fixture in the Frost household, spending most evenings and weekends at the ranch. She maintained her room at Mrs. Pollard's boarding house to preserve propriety, but it was increasingly clear to everyone in Silver Reef that the arrangement was temporary. On a warm Saturday afternoon, while Violet helped Elizabeth plant a small flower garden near the cabin's entrance, Nathan made a decision. Taking Samuel aside, he spoke seriously to his son. I wanted to ask your opinion on something important, Nathan began, kneeling to the boy's level. You know that Miss Whitaker has become very special to our family. Samuel nodded solemnly. She makes you smile again, Papa, like Mama used to. Nathan swallowed hard, touched by his son's perception. Yes, she does. How would you feel if I asked her to become part of our family permanently? To be my wife and to live here with us always. Samuel considered this question with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could muster. Would she be our new mother? She would be my wife, Nathan clarified gently. No one can replace your mother, Samuel. But Violet would help care for you and Elizabeth, and she would love you in her own way. I think Mama would like her, Samuel declared after another moment of consideration. She always said we should be happy, even when sad things happen. Your mother was very wise, Nathan agreed, his voice thick with emotion. Are you going to give Miss Violet a ring like Mama had? Samuel asked practically. Nathan smiled. I was thinking I might. Would you like to help me choose it when we go to town next week? Samuel's face lit up with importance. Yes, but we can't tell Elizabeth she tells all the secrets. With his son's blessing secured, Nathan turned his attention to the practical matters of proposing marriage. The following Saturday, he left Samuel and Elizabeth with Mrs. Reeves while he and Samuel ostensibly traveled to Cedar City for supplies. In reality, they visited the jeweler there, selecting a modest gold band set with a small emerald that reminded Nathan of Violet's eyes. You think she'll like it, Papa? Samuel asked anxiously as they rode back toward Silver Reef. I hope so, Nathan replied, the ring box a reassuring weight in his pocket. But more importantly, I hope she'll like the idea of becoming part of our family. Samuel nodded wisely. She will. She loves us already, I can tell. The simplicity of his son's certainty calmed Nathan's nerves somewhat. He had planned the proposal carefully, a special dinner at the ranch the following evening, after which they would walk to their favorite spot by the creek. Simple but meaningful, like their relationship had been from the start. What Nathan hadn't planned for was the unexpected arrival of the stagecoach from Salt Lake City that afternoon, carrying a distinguished-looking older couple who inquired at the Wells Fargo office about the whereabouts of one Violet Whitaker. Nathan first learned of their arrival when he entered the mercantile to purchase ingredients for the following night's dinner. Mr. Henderson greeted him with raised eyebrows and a meaningful cough. Frost. Interesting developments today. Miss Whitaker's parents have arrived from back east. Quite the surprise from what I gather. Nathan froze, a sack of flour in his hands. Her parents? She didn't mention expecting them. Henderson leaned across the counter conspiratorially. That's because she wasn't. Overheard Mrs. Pollard telling my wife they just appeared on the afternoon stage, all fancy dress and Eastern manners. Apparently, they've come to rescue their daughter from this uncivilized wilderness and bring her back to Philadelphia. Nathan set down the flour with careful precision, his mind racing. Did they say how long they plan to stay? Not long, from the sounds of it, Henderson replied, clearly enjoying being the bearer of significant news. Mrs. Whitaker was quite vocal about the dust ruining her traveling costume and the shocking lack of proper accommodations. Nathan completed his purchases mechanically, his thoughts centered on Violet and what this unexpected development might mean for their plans. Should he proceed with his proposal tomorrow as intended, or would that seem like an attempt to force her hand against her parents' wishes? As he left the mercantile, Nathan spotted Violet across the street, walking between an elegantly dressed older couple who could only be her parents. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her posture and the forced smile on her face as she pointed out various town landmarks. Nathan hesitated, unsure whether to approach them. Before he could decide, Violet glanced up and saw him. Something like relief flashed across her features, and she said something to her parents before crossing the street toward him. Nathan, she greeted him, her voice strained despite her attempt at normalcy. What a surprise to see you in town this afternoon. I was just collecting a few things for tomorrow, he replied, studying her face with concern. Your parents have arrived. Yes, she confirmed, glancing back at the couple who were watching their interaction with poorly concealed interest. Quite unexpectedly. They're concerned about my well-being out here in the savage territories. Her attempt at humor fell flat, the worry evident in her eyes. Would you like me to meet them? Nathan offered, though the prospect filled him with apprehension. Violet hesitated. Perhaps not just yet, there, adjusting to the shock of Silver Reef, and to the revelation that I've become involved with, she broke off, seemingly unsure how to continue. A widowed rancher with 2 small children, Nathan supplied, his heart sinking. A man they know nothing about, Violet corrected firmly. I've written to them about you and the children, of course, but they're traditional in their thinking. They expected me to return to Philadelphia once I'd worked through my grief over James. Nathan nodded his understanding, though disappointment coursed through him. "What will you do?" "Talk with them," Violet said with determination. "Help them understand why I've chosen to remain here." "They're not unreasonable people, Nathan, just protective and set in their ways." Before Nathan could respond, a cultured voice called from across the street. "Violet, dear, we really should continue to the boarding house. This heat is quite oppressive." Violet sighed. "I should go." "Could we postpone our dinner tomorrow? Perhaps give me a few days to help them understand the situation." "Of course," Nathan agreed, though the ring box seemed to burn in his pocket. "Take whatever time you need." Impulsively, Violet reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for understanding." "This changes nothing between us, Nathan. I promise." As he watched her rejoin her parents and continue down the street, Nathan hoped desperately that her promise would hold true. Yet he couldn't shake the fear that Violet's past had come to reclaim her, potentially derailing the future they had begun to envision together. The following days brought little opportunity for private conversation with Violet. Nathan saw her only briefly at church on Sunday, where she introduced him and the children to her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Walter Whitaker, with formal politeness. The elder Whitakers were civil but reserved, clearly assessing Nathan against whatever standard they held for their daughter's companion. By Wednesday, when Nathan still had not been able to speak with Violet alone, he decided to take action. Writing a brief note requesting that she meet him at their usual spot by Silver Creek that evening if possible, he entrusted it to Samuel to deliver at school. His son returned home with a verbal message. Violet would meet him at sunset. The simple confirmation sent relief flooding through Nathan's system. Whatever was happening with her parents, she still wished to see him. As the sun began its descent behind the red cliffs that evening, Nathan rode toward their meeting place, the ring box once again in his pocket. He had no intention of proposing under these strained circumstances, but its presence gave him courage. Violet was already there when he arrived, seated on a large rock overlooking the creek. She wore a simple blue dress he particularly admired, her hair loose around her shoulders in the way she knew he preferred. The sight of her made his heart constrict with both love and anxiety. "Thank you for coming," he said simply as he approached. Violet turned toward him, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. "I've missed you," she admitted, standing to meet him. "These past days have been challenging." Nathan took her hands in his, noting they were cooler than usual despite the warm evening. "Tell me what's happening, Violet," she sighed, her gaze dropping to their joined hands. "My parents arrived with the expectation of taking me back to Philadelphia. They've received an offer from my late husband's family to establish me as a teacher in their private academy. They're a position of considerable prestige and security." "I see," Nathan said carefully, his throat tight. "And is that something you wish to pursue?" Violet looked up sharply. "Of course not. I've told them I have no intention of leaving Silver Reef, that I've built a life here that matters to me." She hesitated, then added softly, "that I've found someone who matters more than any teaching position ever could." Relief washed through Nathan. What was their response? "Initially, disbelief," Violet admitted. "Then concern that I was making decisions based on romantic notions rather than practical considerations. My father particularly worries that I've been charmed by the rustic adventure of territorial life without understanding its hardships." Nathan couldn't entirely fault her father's concerns. "Life here isn't easy," he acknowledged, "especially compared to what you knew in Philadelphia." "I'm well aware of that," Violet said firmly. "I've experienced enough of both worlds to make an informed choice, Nathan. And I choose this life, the challenges alongside the joys." Her expression softened. "I choose you and the children if you'll still have me." In that moment, all Nathan's carefully constructed plans fell away. The scenic proposal, the prepared speech, none of it mattered in the face of this woman's courageous clarity. He released her hands only to reach into his pocket, withdrawing the small velvet box. "I had planned to ask you this Sunday," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Had a whole evening arranged. Samuel helped choose the ring. Violet's eyes widened as she registered what was happening. Nathan. He opened the box, revealing the emerald ring nestled inside. I love you, Violet. These past months have brought light and laughter back into our lives in ways I never thought possible after losing Catherine. If you truly choose this life with all its difficulties and limitations, I would be honored to face it by your side, as husband and wife. Tears filled Violet's eyes as she looked from the ring to Nathan's face. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, his own eyes damp as he pulled her close for a tender kiss that carried all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, Violet rested her head against his chest. Now we just need to tell my parents, she murmured with a hint of apprehension. Nathan chuckled, the sound reverberating under her ear. Perhaps we should bring the children. Your father might be less inclined to shoot a man with 2 small witnesses present. Violet laughed, the tension broken. They're not quite that dramatic, stubborn, yes, but not violent. She looked up at him, her expression growing serious. They need to understand this isn't a hasty decision or a rebellion against their wishes. We've both lived enough to know what matters. Then we'll help them understand, Nathan said with more confidence than he felt. Together. The meeting with Violet's parents the following evening was predictably tense at first. Nathan had invited them to the ranch for supper, wanting them to see the home he could provide for their daughter. The children, coached by Violet beforehand, were on their best behavior, though Elizabeth's excitement about having Miss Violet come live with us forever nearly derailed their careful approach to the announcement. Mrs. Whitaker, a slender woman with Violet's auburn hair now streaked with silver, had visibly softened when Samuel proudly showed her his schoolwork and explained how Miss Violet helps me with my letters even outside of school. Mr. Whitaker, a distinguished gentleman with penetrating eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, had been more reserved but showed interest in Nathan's plans for expanding the ranch. After the children were settled in bed, the 4 adults sat in the main room of the cabin, the weight of unspoken concerns hanging between them. Your home is quite serviceable, Mr. Frost, Mrs. Whitaker offered, clearly choosing her words with care. Though I imagine it must be quite crowded with the children. We have plans to expand, Nathan replied evenly. Add 2 more rooms before winter sets in. Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat. And what are your intentions toward our daughter, Mr. Frost, beyond the arrangement you currently seem to have? Violet intervened before Nathan could respond. Father, as I've been trying to explain since your arrival, Nathan and I care deeply for one another. This isn't a casual attachment. She held out her left hand, the emerald ring catching the lamplight. We intend to marry, with or without your blessing, though we would greatly prefer the former. Mrs. Whitaker gasped softly while Mr. Whitaker's expression darkened. This seems precipitous, Violet. You've known this man, 3 months? After James, we hoped you would exercise more caution in matters of the heart. I understand your concern, Violet acknowledged, but I'm not the same naive girl who married James. I'm a grown woman who has experienced both joy and profound loss. Nathan and I share that understanding. And what of your career? Mrs. Whitaker asked. The position with the Harrington Academy would secure your future regardless of other circumstances. Nathan felt a flicker of irritation at the implication. Violet will always be free to teach if that's her wish. The school board here has already offered to renew her contract, though as my wife, she would be under no financial necessity to accept. Necessity isn't the only reason one might wish to teach, Mr. Whitaker pointed out sharply. Our daughter has always had a vocation for education. Which I can continue here, Violet interjected firmly. Perhaps not with the prestige of Harrington Academy, but with no less meaning or purpose. She reached for Nathan's hand, lacing their fingers together in a gesture of solidarity. I love teaching Samuel and his classmates. I love the life I'm building here, and I love Nathan and his children. These aren't competing interests, they're parts of the whole I wish my life to be." A long silence followed her declaration. Finally, Mrs. Whitaker spoke, her tone more gentle. "When you left Philadelphia, we feared you were running from your grief. Perhaps we didn't consider you might be running toward something else instead." Mr. Whitaker studied the couple before him with a measuring gaze. "Mr. Frost, what will you do if our daughter finds that frontier life doesn't suit her after all? If she misses the comforts and culture of Eastern living?" Nathan met the older man's gaze directly. "I would do whatever was necessary to ensure her happiness, sir. If that meant moving east, I would find a way to make that work. But I believe Violet knows her own mind and heart. She's proven that by the courage it took to come here in the first place." Another silence fell, this one less tense than the first. Mr. Whitaker exchanged a look with his wife, some unspoken communication passing between them. "When do you plan to marry?" Mrs. Whitaker asked finally, a note of resignation in her voice. Violet's face brightened with hope. "We were thinking August, before the school term begins. So soon." Her mother protested. "Life moves at a different pace here," Nathan explained, "and we see no reason to delay building our future together." Mr. Whitaker sighed deeply. "I suppose if we're to help plan a proper wedding for our only daughter, we should extend our stay in this." Interesting territory. It wasn't wholehearted approval, but it was acceptance, a beginning that Nathan and Violet could work with. As the evening concluded with tentative plans for the ceremony, Nathan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The path forward might still hold challenges, but they would face them together, their family united by choice rather than convention. The following weeks passed in a flurry of wedding preparations, tempered by the practical demands of ranch life and Violet's continuing teaching responsibilities. Mrs. Whitaker, having resigned herself to her daughter's choice, threw herself into ensuring the ceremony would be as refined as Silver Reef could manage. Mr. Whitaker, meanwhile, developed an unexpected interest in Nathan's ranching operation, offering both practical advice from his business background and, more surprisingly, an investment to fund the cabin expansion and additional cattle. "Consider it our wedding gift," he told Nathan gruffly one evening as they inspected the corral together, "and insurance that my daughter will have a comfortable home." By early August, the Frost Ranch had been transformed. The cabin sported 2 new rooms, a proper bedroom for Nathan and Violet, and a small study where Violet could prepare her lessons and the children could read. The yard had been cleared and leveled for the wedding celebration, with wildflowers planted along the path to the cabin entrance. On the morning of their wedding day, Nathan stood in his best suit, newly purchased at Mrs. Whitaker's insistence, watching as guests arrived from Silver Reef and neighboring communities. Samuel, solemn in his role as ring-bearer, stood beside his father, periodically checking his pocket to ensure the simple gold band Nathan would place on Violet's finger hadn't disappeared. "Are you nervous, Papa?" the boy whispered as more wagons appeared on the horizon. Nathan smiled down at his son. "A little, but mostly I'm happy." "Me too," Samuel declared. "Elizabeth says we should call Miss Violet Mama after today. Is that right?" The question caught Nathan off guard. "That would be up to Miss Violet," he said carefully, "and to you and your sister. You can call her whatever feels right to you." Samuel considered this thoughtfully. "I think I'll still keep my first mama in my heart, but Miss Violet can be my second mama." "That sounds like a perfect solution," Nathan agreed, his throat tight with emotion. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful, held beneath the cottonwood tree where they'd shared so many Sunday picnics. Reverend Parker officiated, his words about new beginnings and blended families bringing tears to many eyes, including those of Mr. Whitaker, who gruffly denied any such weakness afterward. Violet was radiant in a dove-gray silk dress her mother had insisted on ordering from Salt Lake City, her auburn hair crowned with wildflowers gathered by Elizabeth that morning. As she spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice, Nathan felt a sense of rightness settle over him, a certainty that this union, unexpected as it had been, was meant to be. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music provided by local miners who doubled as fiddlers, and food contributed by nearly every family in Silver Reef. As twilight descended, Nathan found a moment of quiet with his new wife, both of them watching as the children danced with other young guests, their faces alight with joy. "Happy, Mrs. Frost?" he asked softly, his arm around her waist. Violet leaned into his embrace, her head resting on his shoulder. "Completely. Though I'm still not certain my father is entirely reconciled to the idea of his daughter living in a wilderness outpost, as he calls it." Nathan chuckled. "He's coming around. I caught him pricing land near Silver Creek yesterday. I think your mother might have convinced him that winter visits would be more comfortable if they had their own place nearby." "Really?" Violet turned to him in surprise. "He said nothing to me about this." "I believe he wanted it to be a surprise," Nathan admitted. "Though perhaps I've ruined that now." Violet laughed, the sound mingling with the fiddle music and conversation around them. "I'm glad. Having them visit occasionally would be wonderful, especially for the children to know their grandparents." As if on cue, Elizabeth ran up to them, her dark curls escaping from their ribbons after hours of play. "Mama Violet." She called excitedly, the newly adopted name falling naturally from her lips. "Grandma Whitaker says I may have a piece of wedding cake to take to bed with me. May I, please?" Violet knelt to the child's level, smoothing back her wayward curls. "Just this once, since it's a special day. But you must wash your hands and face afterward, or you'll have ants for bedfellows." Elizabeth nodded solemnly before dashing off to claim her treat, leaving Nathan and Violet exchanging amused glances. "Mama Violet," Nathan repeated softly. "It suits you." "It's the most precious title I've ever been given," Violet admitted, her eyes following the little girl's progress through the crowd. "Far more meaningful than schoolmarm or even wife, though I cherish that one too." As the evening continued, guests gradually departed until only the immediate family remained. The Whitakers retired to the room that had been prepared for them in the expanded cabin, while Nathan and Violet tucked exhausted children into bed, accepting sleepy kisses and answering last-minute questions about their upcoming trip to Salt Lake City for a brief honeymoon. Finally alone in their new bedroom, with moonlight streaming through the window Nathan had carefully positioned to catch the morning sun, husband and wife found themselves almost shy with each other, the reality of their new status suddenly present between them. "It hardly seems real," Violet confessed as Nathan helped her with the buttons of her dress. "From sharing a hymnal to sharing a life in just a few months." "Having doubts?" Nathan asked lightly, though a flicker of uncertainty passed through him. Violet turned in his arms, her expression serious. "Not one. This path may not be what I envisioned when I left Philadelphia, but it's infinitely better." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes. "You and the children have given me a home in every sense of the word." As they came together as husband and wife, the last barriers between them falling away, Nathan silently thanked whatever providence had led Violet to that church few months ago. From the depths of loss, they had found each other not as replacements for what had been taken, but as new beginnings neither had thought possible. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Frost family. Nathan's ranch flourished with the additional investment and his own tireless work, eventually becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Violet continued teaching for several years before the arrival of their first child together, a son they named William, led her to focus on home education instead, turning their expanded cabin into a place of learning for their own children, and occasionally others from outlying ranches, too distant from town for daily school attendance. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who combined his father's practical skills with his stepmother's love of learning, eventually attending college in Salt Lake City, before returning to help manage the family ranch. Elizabeth, blossoming under Violet's gentle guidance, developed a talent for music that brought beauty and culture to their home in ways Catherine might have done had she lived. The Whitakers did indeed purchase property near Silver Reef, visiting regularly and gradually coming to appreciate the unique qualities of territorial life. Mr. Whitaker even developed a reputation as something of a local character, regaling the miners at the Silver Reef Saloon with tales of Eastern business escapades, while carefully maintaining his dignified demeanor. On a crisp Sunday morning in the autumn of 1889, a decade after their first meeting, Nathan and Violet sat in their usual pew at the Silver Reef Church, now expanded to accommodate the growing community. Between them sat their children, 17-year-old Samuel, 15-year-old Elizabeth, 9-year-old William, 7-year-old Anna, and 4-year-old James, named for Violet's first husband in a gesture of remembrance and respect. As the congregation stood for the first hymn, Violet automatically positioned her hymnal where the younger children could see it, just as she had done that first Sunday with Samuel and Elizabeth. Nathan, watching her familiar gesture, felt the same surge of gratitude and love that had never diminished through the years of partnership. "What?" Violet whispered, noticing his gaze. "Just remembering," he replied softly. A lonely widower, 2 small children, and the woman who moved to his pew and shared her hymnal. Violet's smile deepened, understanding immediately. "The best move I ever made," she murmured, before turning her attention back to the music, her clear voice joining with their children's in perfect harmony. As they sang together, Nathan reflected on the journey they had traveled from strangers united by circumstance to a family bound by choice and love. Life in Silver Reef had not always been easy, but it had been rich with meaning and connection, proving that even in the wild territories of the American West, healing and second chances were possible for those brave enough to reach for them. And it had all begun with a shared hymnal and the courage to make room on a pew for something unexpected and wonderful.